Welcome back to BeFM Drama, where we're presenting Part 4 in our 5-part adaptation of The Dancing Men, a classic Sherlock Holmes mystery from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this edition of the program, Holmes continues his investigation into the double shooting that has left his client Hilton Cubitt dead and his American wife Elsie horribly wounded. The Cubitts had been harassed for several weeks prior by a series of mysterious messages, chains of dancing stick figures written on notes or in chalk around the house and property. And Holmes believes the violence was connected to these messages, which he has decoded, and is now fiercely devoted to avenging the death of his client. Inspector Martin and I followed Holmes out to the lawn in front of the study, where we had finished our investigation of the crime scene, in search of evidence of the third man Holmes believed to be involved in the shooting. A flower bed stretched right up to the study window, and we broke into an exclamation as we approached it. The flowers were trampled down, and the soft soil beneath was imprinted all over with large boot marks. Holmes rushed into the flower bed and started digging around like an excited terrier. Then, with a cry of satisfaction, he stood up, holding a little brass cylinder between his finger and thumb.
I thought so. The revolver had an ejector, and this is the third cartridge. I really think, Inspector Martin, that our case is almost complete.
The country inspector's face showed his intense amazement at the rapid and masterful progress of Holmes's investigation.
Whom do you suspect?
I'll go into that later. Right now, there are several points about this problem I have not explained to you yet. I will do so in a few minutes, but just now, there are 1 or 2 points I need to clarify before we can clear this whole matter up once and for all.
As you wish, Mr. Holmes, as long as we get our man.
I have all the threads of this affair in my hand. Even if poor Elsie Cubitt never regains consciousness, we can still reconstruct the events of last night and ensure that justice is done. First of all, I need to know if there is an inn in this neighborhood known as Elridge's.
The servants were questioned, but none of them had heard of such a place. Then the stable boy suddenly remembered that a farmer named Elridge lived several miles away, in the direction of East Ruston.
Is it a lonely farm?
Very lonely, sir.
Perhaps they had not yet heard of what happened here last night?
Maybe not, sir.
Holmes thought for a little, and then a curious smile played over his face.
Saddle a horse, my lad. I want you to take a note to Elridge's farm.
Holmes led us back to the study and took from his pocket all the papers with the dancing men. With these in front of him, he worked for some time at the study table, feet away from the bloodstains on the carpet where the victims had fallen. Finally, he handed a note to the boy.
Give this only to the person it is addressed to.
And who is that, sir?
Mr. Abe Slaney, currently residing at Elridge's farm, East Ruston, Norfolk.
The boy hurried out for his horse, and Holmes turned to the inspector.
I think, Martin, that it would be wise to send for some additional men. If my calculations prove to be correct, we may have a particularly dangerous prisoner to escort to the county jail. Watson?
Yes, Holmes?
Do me a favor and check the timetable for an afternoon train to London. I have a chemical analysis of some interest waiting at home, and this investigation is rapidly nearing its conclusion.
With the boy on his way with the note, Sherlock Holmes gave instructions to the servants that if anyone arrived asking for Mrs. Hilton Cubitt, they should make no mention of her condition and lead the visitor to the drawing room. With that done, he led the inspector and I to the drawing room and sat us around a card table, where he threw the dancing men papers down in front of himself.
There's a bit of time to kill now, but I think I can spare you gentlemen some boredom with a little intellectual exercise. Watson, I owe you an apology for letting your curiosity go unsatisfied so long. To you, Inspector, the whole incident may appeal as a professional study, but first I must catch you up on the details of my previous conversations with the unfortunate Hilton Cubitt in London.
Holmes quickly explained the story of the dancing men to the inspector, who listened with fascination. Once he completed the tale, the detective gestured to the papers on the table.
I have here in front of me these unusual images. You might smile at them, were they not connected with such a tragedy. I am familiar with all forms of secret writing, and I have analyzed 160 different ciphers, but I confess that this code is entirely new to me. I believe that the purpose of those who created it was to conceal that these characters convey a message, and to give the false idea that they were the random sketches of children. Do you follow me so far?
The inspector and I nodded, like school children before their teacher.
Having decided that these symbols stood for letters, I applied the rules used in all forms of secret writing. The method is simple enough, but the first message given to me was so short that it was impossible to do more than say, with some confidence, that one of the symbols stood for E. As you are aware, E is the most common letter in the English alphabet, and is so dominant that even in short sentences one can expect to find it most often. Out of 15 symbols in the first message, 4 were the same, and it was reasonable to mark this down as E. It is true that in some cases the figure was holding a flag and in others not, but I decided from the way the flags were distributed that they were used to mark the endings of words.
Martin and I nodded, and Holmes continued his cryptography lecture.
But here came the really difficult part. The frequency of the English letters after E is by no means regular. It would have been an endless task for me to try every possible combination of letters in so small a sample, having only the letter E to work with, so I decided to wait for fresh material. In my second meeting with Mr. Hilton Cubitt, he gave me 2 other short sentences and one message which appeared, since there was no flag, to be a single word.
Holmes pulled 3 sheets of notepaper from the pile and straightened them into a line.
Here are the symbols. Now, in the single word message of 5 letters, I have 2 E's. The word might be sever, or lever, or never. I had no doubt that never was the most likely as a reply to a request or demand, and I believe that the message was written by the Lady Cubitts herself. I now had the letters for N, V, and R.
Here a smile broadened on my friend's face, and I could see how pleased he was with his own brilliance.
Here I had a very happy thought. It occurred to me that if the messages were coming from someone who had known Mrs. Cubitt for her marriage, then a combination of figures containing 2 E's with 3 letters in between them must be Elsie.
Holmes pulled another sheet of paper from the pile and pointed at it.
You recognize this one, Watson?
Yes, that's the message that Hilton Cubitt found 3 times.
Precisely. 2 words, the second being Elsie. In this way, I'd gotten my L, S, and I. There were only 4 letters in the word coming before Elsie, and it ended in E. Surely the word must be come. Nothing else made sense. This message, repeated 3 times, was the command, "Come, Elsie." Now I was ready to go back and attack the first message.
Here Holmes abruptly cut off his lecture and began to work quickly with a pencil and paper, running us through the complex series of substitutions and guesswork, which had finally cracked the code completely. Eventually, he sat back with a sigh and held up the sheet of paper. It showed the series of stick figures with a letter written beneath each. The message spelled out, "Am here, Abe Slaney." Martin whistled in admiration.
And now the same for the second message.
Again, the quick substitution of letters beneath the chain of figures revealing the message, "At Elridge's." Holmes waggled his eyebrows at us, amused at our reverence towards him.
What meaning did you make from these messages?
I had every reason to believe that this Abe Slaney was an American because Abe is an American contraction and because a letter from America was the starting point for all the trouble. I also had every reason to think that there was some criminal secret in this business. The lady's absolute refusal to speak of her past pointed in that direction. I therefore telegraphed my friend Wilson Hargrave of the New York Police Bureau, who has more than once benefited from my knowledge of London crime. I asked him if the name of Abe Slaney was known to him. Here is his reply: "The most dangerous crook in Chicago." I received his telegraph last night, immediately after the last letter arrived from Hilton Cubitt with the longest chain of dancing men. Working through my cipher, I uncovered this final message.
Holmes held up the paper with the decoded message, and I felt a sudden shock run through me as I immediately understood the sudden, urgent fear that had overcome my friend the night before. Written beneath the dancing stick figures in block capitals were the words, "Elsie, prepare to meet thy God." Holmes caught my expression and smiled sadly.
Quite so, Watson, and so we rushed to Norfolk this morning only to find that this terrible tragedy had already occurred.
And so the brilliant detective Sherlock Holmes has cracked the code of the dancing men and revealed the name of the man responsible for the death of the Honorable Hilton Cubitt and the horrible injuries inflicted on his wife Elsie. But what motivated this American gangster, this Abe Slaney, to journey to rural Norfolk and terrorize Elsie Cubitt with this sinister code of dancing men? And who, for that matter, really is Elsie Cubitt, this American woman with a mysterious past and 1,000 pounds in her purse, who begged her now-murdered husband not to involve himself with the sinister business that threatened them? Discover the answer to these questions tomorrow in the final installment of our adaptation of The Dancing Men here on BeFM Drama.